Today we're looking at another system monitor. This one is called Zenith. Now most of what it does is fairly standard fare for these types of applications. If I was to compare it to anything, I would say this is sort of like a Htop Lite. Now, the reason why we are talking about this is because of one really interesting quirk it has that I feel like if it expanded upon could make it a really unique application. So we have the general stuff you'd expect to see here. We have a CPU tab, we have a network tab, we have a disks and file system, and also our processors. If we want to go and cycle through these, that can be done by using tab. Shift tab doesn't actually take you in the other direction. That is one problem I do actually have with it, but considering there's only 4 sections, it's not that big of a deal. And while a lot of the information is laid out in a very info-dumpy sort of fashion, it's not necessarily bad and gets the job done basically as well as it needs to. So for example, with the CPU section up here, the first time you look at this, it is kind of difficult to work out where the data is supposed to be split up, but once you look at this for a couple of minutes, it's really easy to work out that this is the CPU percentage, this is the mean, this is the top process, and that pretty much applies to everything else in here as well. One problem is it does actually have a lot of wasted space, so it doesn't get rid of this space when that space isn't being used, which does lead to situations where you might have this, where it's just sitting in the center of this massive block. It does help in making sure data isn't shifted around, but it can look a little bit off-putting. So the interesting thing this does is if we go and press the left or the right arrow key, this is going to let us go and cycle backwards and forwards through the history of our system. So if we go backwards, let's say, I don't know, 7.5 minutes. This is basically how our CPU, network, and our disk was at that point in time. Now, it's not actually going to keep us statically at that point. What it's going to do is as the data updates, it's always going to keep us located 7.5 minutes behind where we're currently at. And currently it's showing us a data window of 5 minutes. So from this point here to this point here, that is going to be 5 minutes of data collection. And you can modify this, but the way it's modified, I don't exactly like, and it needs way more granularity. So if we go and press the minus key, that is going to zoom us out to 11 minutes, then again to 17 minutes, then again to 22. It's not actually showing the data at this point, so it doesn't seem to be updating properly. Maybe because I'm zoomed in too far? No, it's just not showing the data properly. And if we go and press plus, that will zoom us in, obviously, but we can only get in as close as 5 minutes. I have managed to get it to 3 minutes in some cases, so I don't really know why it's stopping there. I would like this to go in intervals of maybe 30 seconds or even just a minute would be much better. And letting us get down to just the minute of data so I can see exactly when stuff is happening. Obviously, there's going to be limitations in what can be drawn inside of a terminal. I totally get that. And I think an application like this would work way, way better as a simple graphical application, maybe even keeping the exact same layout, but that would give you way more control over how the graph is actually being drawn and would actually allow you to get down to those very zoomed in levels and show exactly when spikes might actually be happening. And likewise, something that I feel like really gets hindered by the fact that it's a terminal application is the way the CPU section works. So firstly, never spell CPUs like this, because that implies that it's a different acronym. This S should be lowercase, but that's just a minor problem. The way the CPU cores are being displayed is actually kind of interesting. So firstly, it lists out all the different cores, pretty normal. Then it lists out a percentage, along with having a little Unicode bar that's going up and down to indicate how much of the CPU is actually being used. So Unicode is really powerful in this respect, and you can get like very slight changes to this bar, but ultimately you're still working with Unicode, and there's only so much granularity you can really have. But this does give you a really good visual indication of how much your cores are actually being used. Now, oddly, the memory and the swap are in the CPU section. In something like Htop, that would be in the disks and file system. I feel like that position makes way more sense, especially when swap is literally just disk space. Like, I get why it's here. It's because a lot of CPUs now have at least 8 threads, and when you have 8 threads, it's going to go on to the next line, so you're going to have like a bunch of wasted space in here, and it just saves a bit of space with the application. Makes sense why it's there. I just don't think for, I guess, understanding what the data is, it's the best place for it to be. Now, one thing seriously missing from the disk and file system section is the actual disks in your system. So while it does list out like how much is being used by your root and how much is being used by your home, in my case, I have these on separate hard drives, so it doesn't really give a good indication of how much is really being used. So my SDA drive, that is my mechanical hard drive, that is where my home directory is stored, and then my NVMe, that is where my root directory is. And just listing those out would give a much better indication of what's actually being said here, because right now, if you can't see it, it adds up to 103%. Besides that, though, there's not really much noteworthy to say about either the networking section or the disk and file system section. So the networking section has the current upload, it has the maximum upload, it has the current download, the maximum download, and then likewise for the disk and file system, we have the current read, the maximum read, the current write, and the maximum write. The one difference between the two of them is that in the disk and file system section, it shows the process that currently has the highest read and highest write, but it doesn't show the process with the highest network usage. Now, when I mentioned tabbing through the different sections before, it doesn't actually have a purpose, because the only section in here that actually has any keybinds attached to it is the process section. So being able to do this, at least in its current state, doesn't really have a point. I presume at some point the dev maybe wanted to add something to that, but right now, just leave it on this one. With the process section, while all of the keybinds are listed out, not all of them are, so it can be a little bit confusing to actually use this section. So things that are listed are going up and down by using the arrow keys, changing the sorting column. Right now, it is set to whatever P is. We can do that by pressing either the comma key to go towards the left, or we can press the period key to go towards the right, and we can change the direction stuff is being sorted by pressing slash. So right now it's being sorted down, now it's being sorted up, or I guess ascending and descending would be the correct way to say that. And if you want to go and filter, that can be done by pressing F, and then let's say we search for 30. Now, if we go and press enter on any of these, that is actually going to open up another page where we can do things like suspend it, or resume it, or kill it, or terminate it. We can't go and send arbitrary signals, but we can at least do things like sig kill. That is one of the problems that a lot of these applications have that make me keep going back to Htop. None of them give you the ability to send an arbitrary signal. So if I go into Htop and I want to go and, I don't know, if we, let's say, want to send a signal to awesome, for example, if we go and press F9 on that, here is a list of every single signal that we can send. Sure, some of them won't always have uses for every single application, but it gives you the option to actually send them. I don't just want to send like 3 or 4 signals you deem being useful. Just have a list of every single signal. Now, I kind of lied when I said there's nothing tabbing lets us do. There's 2 things we can technically do, but they're not really that exciting. So if we go and press E, that is going to go and expand a section, and then M is going to minimize? I don't know what other shrinking word I could think of that starts with M, but it shrinks the section. And if we go and press F1 on the section, that will then go and let us actually hide different sections. So let's say we don't want to see the networking section. If we go and press space on that one, and then press F1 to return, now networking is no longer displayed. Now, you may have seen a graphics section there, but I personally haven't had that one working. It's supposed to work with AMD cards, but this is the result that I get. Now, when you quit out of the application, it doesn't actually save any of the changes you've made, which is kind of annoying, and it doesn't have a config file, so there's no way to make it so it always starts like that by just running the Zenith application, but it does have options to launch it in a certain way. The options are very basic, so we have CPU height, disk height, network height, process height, and refresh rate. Now, one problem with refresh rate is it doesn't let you go below 1000 milliseconds. So if we try to set it to something like 500, it will complain to you. There's no technical reason why that should be the case. If I lower the refresh rate, let me lower it, and then update it at a quicker rate. I don't care if it's going to be really laggy, let me go and change that value. Htop lets you set it to a point where it basically freezes your system. You shouldn't do it, but it gives you that freedom to do that. So if you want it to be launched in a certain way, then you would go and do that. One thing you can't do here, though, is set which windows you want to see open. Now, this is all of the options that exist. The way that it's looked throughout this entire video is the way it's always going to look. There is no theming that exists. I would like to see that, and that would be one of the things I would probably change myself. Also, it's showing a different amount of minutes now. I don't know why. I don't know what that's linked to. I thought it was showing 5 minutes because there was so much data, so I don't know how it actually determines that number. Maybe it determines it based on how much I'm zoomed in when I start the application. Actually, let's experiment with that. Okay, now it's showing 3 minutes. I'm gonna guess that it does that based on my zoom. I think. I don't know what else it could be. Now, I know throughout this video, I've been comparing this to things like Htop and Htop, and when it comes to these terminal system monitors, it's very difficult not to compare it to those applications, because I feel like they're probably the best in their field right now. Zenith is not a bad application, but I feel like it still needs a lot of work to actually expand upon the parts that do make it unique. I wanted to show off this application because I do think it is a cool base for a project. There's just a lot of work that needs to be done to make it really, really cool to use. I think that's going to be it for me, and if you like this video and you want to support this channel and become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe, Starly Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays, where I live stream twice a week, upload about 5 or so YouTube shorts, and then this channel is also available over on Odyssey. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.